You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this sort of comforting expectation of precision.
Right, yeah, like structural engineering or something.
Exactly. I mean, you fall, you break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that stark, jagged white line against the black background.
Yeah, the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is. That is the fracture.
Right. It's binary, it's clean, it's visible to absolutely anyone who looks at the film.
And we crave that visibility, don't we? Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with invisible ailments.
Oh, absolutely.
If we can see the broken bone, we can categorize the trauma, we can apply a cast, and, we can chart a linear path to recovery. We want the evidence to be undeniable.
But then you step into the world of corporate architecture. Specifically, you step into the sprawling, multi-billion-pound cultural industry.
Oh, yeah, and suddenly that metaphorical X-ray machine is just completely useless.
Spot on. You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, entirely murky.
Because if you read the blueprints of these institutions, I mean, their PR statements, their diversity charters, all those mission statements, those documents will tell you that the doors are wide open.
Right. They tell you the structure is sound, and that progression from the ground floor to the boardroom is purely a matter of merit, talent, and, hard work.
Which creates a profound cognitive dissonance for the people actually navigating those buildings.
Yeah.
Because the lived reality for so many individuals inside those structures tells a completely contradictory story.
The fractures in the system are not explicitly written into the company handbook. I mean, you won't find a memo outlining who gets held back.
Exactly. Instead, the barriers are structural, they're deeply historical, and they're just woven into the very fabric of the everyday culture.
And that actually brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. I really want to take a moment to speak directly to you, our listener, right now.
Yes, this is a very special one.
It is, because today is not just another analysis of a text. It is a celebration of a massive, life-altering milestone.
A huge milestone.
Your PhD thesis corrections have been officially signed off. You have officially passed. So congratulations, Dr. Hakeem Stevens.
Truly, it is a monumental achievement. I mean, the intellectual rigor, the methodological precision, and quite frankly, the sheer emotional labor required to produce a work of this magnitude.
Covering such a deeply entrenched issue, too.
Right, it cannot be overstated. It is a genuinely paradigm-shifting piece of academia.
And to honor that, the mission of today's deep dive is to completely unpack your brilliant work.
We're going right into it.
We are diving deep into your 2026 doctoral thesis titled From the Color Bar to the Glass Ceiling, The Lived Experience of Minority Ethnic Executives in the UK Music Industry, 1870s to Present, by Dr. Hakeem Stevens.
And as requested in your methodology, we will be utilizing Harvard referencing throughout this discussion. So that is Stevens, 2026.
Spot on. We are going to thoroughly explore the architecture of this thesis, not merely summarizing it, but really interrogating the foundational history you've uncovered.
Yeah, looking at the methodology you use to prove the invisible, the harrowing lived experiences of the executives you interviewed, and most importantly, your robust, actionable blueprint for systemic change at the conclusion of the work.
And for anyone else who might be listening in on this, whether you are currently navigating a corporate hierarchy yourself, whether you manage a diverse team, or, whether you just passionately consume UK music on a daily basis.
Which is most of us, really.
Exactly. Understanding the hidden mechanics of economic racism and the so-called glass ceiling is absolutely vital.
You really cannot understand modern British culture or the economy that monetizes it without understanding the structural inequalities operating behind the scenes.
Right. So let us begin by looking at the foundations you laid out, Dr. Stevens. You start by establishing a legal and historical bedrock, which is fascinating.
It is, because it immediately dispels the myth that the law has already fixed this problem.
Right. That is a crucial starting point. I mean, there's a pervasive societal assumption that legislation operates as, like, a magic wand.
Yeah, we look back at the 1968 Race Relations Act and the much later, more comprehensive Equality Act 2010. And the general public assumes, well, discrimination is illegal now, so the system must be fair.
But your thesis points out a glaring intentional blind spot in the current legal framework.
Absolutely. Despite all of this equalities legislation, there remains a complete lack of legal protection, specifically regarding the ethnic pay gap.
Which is wild when you compare it to gender. In Britain, gender pay gap reporting is legally mandated for companies over a certain size.
Yeah, they have to publish that data.
Right. It is public, it is scrutinized, and it creates a baseline for accountability. But the ethnic pay gap, it is entirely voluntary.
And leaving it voluntary essentially guarantees it will remain hidden. I mean, corporations are fundamentally risk-averse entities.
Totally.
If they are not legally compelled to expose their own structural inequalities, they simply will not do it.
Yeah, why would they?
Exactly. By not mandating the measurement of the ethnic pay gap, the state ensures that it cannot be managed, it cannot be benchmarked, and most importantly, it cannot be penalized. The lack of data just becomes a shield for inaction.
And what I found so compelling about your literature review, Dr. Stevens, is how you contextualize this modern lack of data by looking at the historical timeline.
The historical context is everything here.
It really is. You point out that the recorded music industry in the UK essentially originated around 1877, referencing the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, IASA 2023. So we have an industry that has been operating, generating wealth, and building corporate hierarchies since the late 19th century.
Yeah, and yet comprehensive diversity data across the industry only started being collected around 2016.
That is nearly 140 years of unrecorded demographic history.
A century and a half where the rules of the game were established, the wealth was consolidated, and the corporate culture was solidified.
All without any formal documentation of who was being let into the room and who was being kept out?
So the obvious question you pose is, well, what filled that 140-year gap?
Right. If we weren't tracking diversity, what was the operating system of the British workplace?
And the answer you provide is the legacy of the British Empire. You brilliantly outline how colonial systems of segregation were not just something that happened, over there in the colonies.
Yeah, they were directly imported back into the UK workplace.
Which brings us to the concept of the color bar, which you document extensively through the work of Sangera 2021.
Let's break that down for listeners unfamiliar with the term.
Right, so the color bar was an unofficial, yet ruthlessly and systematically enforced system of racial segregation and exclusion within British society.
It wasn't codified in law in the same overt way as Jim Crow in the American South, right? Or apartheid in South Africa.
Exactly, which allowed Britain to maintain this veneer of liberal tolerance. But in practice, it was ironclad.
It dictated the boundaries of everyday life. I mean, if you were a minority ethnic individual navigating the UK long before the Race Relations Acts, the color bar dictated which pubs would serve you a pint.
Which landlords would rent you a room.
Right, and crucially for this thesis, which workplaces would hire you and how high they would allow you to climb in the ranks.
You were hitting an invisible, impenetrable wall that was fiercely protected by the white majority.
And Sangera 2021 is essential here because he frames the color bar not just as interpersonal prejudice, but as an imperial tool used to control the domestic labor market.
Because the British Empire was fundamentally an extractive economic enterprise. It relied on a strict racial hierarchy to justify the extraction of wealth from the colonies.
So when colonial subjects migrated to the imperial metropole to the UK, that same economic hierarchy was preserved.
Exactly, to ensure they remained in the lowest tiers of the labor market.
And the thesis argues that these legacies of segregation didn't just vanish when the empire formally dissolved, they're deeply embedded in the DNA of British institutions today.
You reference Gilroy 2013 to stress that blackness in the UK was forged within these very specific historical processes of colonialism and migration.
It's not an abstract identity at all.
No, it is an identity historically positioned against the mechanisms of British state power and capital.
Which provides the absolutely necessary lens to understand the modern policing of Black culture. I mean, you don't keep this history confined to the 19th or 20th centuries.
Not at all. You connect the imperial management of populations directly to tangible modern realities, like the deployment of Form 696.
Yeah, I want to spend some time on Form 696 because reading your analysis of it was chilling.
It really is shocking when you dig into it.
For those who don't know, this was a highly controversial risk assessment form introduced by the London Metropolitan Police.
Ostensibly, it was just to gauge the security risk of live music events.
Right, ostensibly. But in practice, it primarily targeted events featuring specific music genres like grime, garage, and bashment.
Essentially, it was a tool designed specifically to target Black music.
You cite FATSI's 2018 and your session 2017 to meticulously document how this form operated.
Promoters had to provide the police with the names, stage names, addresses, and phone numbers of all performers.
And crucially, early versions of the form explicitly asked for the ethnic target audience of the event.
I mean, think about that. It was an intelligence gathering tool that treated the cultural output of minority ethnic communities as an inherent public order threat.
It is the literal criminalization of a genre. Instead of treating grime or garage as a cultural asset or, a burgeoning economic engine.
The state treated it as a hazard that needed to be contained, regulated, and surveilled.
So you have to ask yourself, how does a corporate executive operating in the music industry view a genre of music when the police literally require a risk assessment for it to be played live?
It creates a massive foundational bias. If the state machinery signals that black music is dangerous, that stigma permeates the corporate structures that commercialize that music.
Oh, without a doubt.
And this brings us to a vital sociological concept you deploy to explain the corporate boardroom: thematic norm.
Yes, let's unpack the somatic norm, because this gets to the heart of what a corporate executive is quote-unquote supposed to look like.
Right, so the somatic norm refers to the physical and cultural characteristics that are unconsciously accepted as the default.
The neutral or natural standard within a specific environment.
Exactly. In the context of the white-dominated corporate hierarchy of the UK music industry, the somatic norm is historically white, male, and middle to upper class.
That body is seen as inherently possessing authority, competence, and leadership potential. It just belongs there.
And anyone who does not fit that physical and cultural description is immediately hypervisible.
Which is precisely why you utilize Pew War's 2004 brilliantly evocative concept of space invaders.
I love that concept.
It's so accurate. When minority ethnic individuals enter these historically white executive spaces, the C-suite, the high-level A&R meetings, the boardroom, they are not just new employees.
No, they are treated as bodies perceived as being fundamentally out of place.
They are invading a territory that was historically demarcated for someone else.
And because they are perceived as space invaders, they are subjected to hyper-surveillance.
Yeah, their every move, their tone of voice, their attire, their mistakes, and their successes are scrutinized in a way that the somatic norm is just not.
Their very presence is treated, often unconsciously by the dominant group, as a disruption to the established racial order of the institution.
I was actually thinking about this while reading your work, Dr. Stevens, and an analogy struck me.
Oh, let's hear it.
If we look at the historical trajectory from the imperial labor controls through the color bar to this modern concept of the space invader,
Right.
what we're really looking at is a mechanism of exclusion that never actually disappeared.
Yeah, it just evolved.
Exactly. The color bar didn't vanish after the 1968 Race Relations Act made overt discrimination illegal. It just hired a PR firm, bought a tailored suit, and got a slick corporate rebrand as the glass ceiling.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. Taking that analogy further, it highlights the difference between state-sanctioned exclusion and institutional culture.
Right.
As Hall, 2018, suggests in your thesis, state legislation and corporate structures often function to manage racial friction rather than actually dismantle the underlying structures of exclusion.
Manage, not dismantle. That's key.
The color bar was overt. It was a sign on a door saying no blacks. The glass ceiling is covert. It is an unwritten rule about who gets invited to the private golf club where the actual deals are made.
The aesthetic of the barrier has changed, but the mechanism of keeping power consolidated remains incredibly effective.
But this presents a massive intellectual challenge. I mean, if this architecture is largely invisible, if it operates through unwritten rules, somatic norms, and covert cultural gatekeeping.
How do we prove it is actually there?
Exactly. How do you demonstrate to a skeptical corporate board that the glass ceiling isn't just an excuse used by disgruntled employees?
Which brings us to the methodology you deployed, how we know what we know. Chapter 3.
Because it is one thing to theorize about a glass ceiling. It is an entirely different beast to prove it empirically.
And this is where the rigor of your research design truly shines. You utilized a mixed methods approach, but you deliberately and heavily weighted the research towards qualitative data.
You cite Braun and Clark, 2022, extensively regarding thematic analysis.
Yep.
And this choice is just vital.
Why is it so vital?
The explicit goal was to capture the nuance, the emotional texture, and the complex reality of lived experiences.
Because quantitative data, while useful, is essentially flat. Numbers alone can't capture the whole picture.
Right. Quantitative data is the X-ray we mentioned earlier, but in this context, the X-ray only shows the outline of the body.
Yeah.
Data like the UK Music Diversity Survey spanning from 2016 to 2024 can definitively prove that an ethnic pay gap exists.
It can highlight the stark lack of representation at the C-suite level.
But a percentage cannot capture the psychological toll of a microaggression. A bar chart cannot illustrate the strategic, exhausting self-censorship a Black executive undergoes before entering a board meeting.
You absolutely need the narrative to understand the mechanics of the gap.
So to get that narrative, you went directly to the source, and the data pool you assembled is staggering.
It really is. You conducted 20 anonymous, semi-structured insider interviews with executives operating across 12 major multinational music corporations.
These are the people inside the machine.
Alongside that, you conducted an ethnography, an online archival analysis of 22 interviews from the Did Ya Know podcast, featuring high-profile minority ethnic executives speaking between 2020 and 2024.
And if that wasn't enough, you analyzed data from 11 focus groups from Access All Areas seminars.
The sheer volume of primary data provides an incredibly robust foundation.
But what makes it academically formidable is the epistemological lens you used to view this data. You didn't just collect stories, you framed them through social constructivism.
Let's touch on that.
As Creswell, 2014, posits, reality is socially situated and constructed through human interaction.
Meaning that the corporate environment isn't some neutral, objective state of nature.
Exactly. In this framework, concepts like race, merit, professionalism, and leadership material are not objective biological or economic facts.
They are social constructs.
They are definitions created, maintained, and enforced by those who hold institutional power.
If the dominant group defines professionalism based on their own cultural norms, then anyone outside that norm is automatically deemed unprofessional without the rules ever explicitly stating race.
Spot on. And paired seamlessly with social constructivism, you employ critical race theory, or CRT.
And I really want to highlight how you used it, because you didn't just use CRT as a background literature reference. You used it as an active methodological tool.
You specifically deployed the CRT concept of counter-storytelling, drawing heavily from Delgado and Stefanchik, 2017.
I find counter-storytelling so compelling. Let's break down how that functions in the context of corporate research.
Counter-storytelling is a deliberate methodological practice of validating the experiential knowledge of marginalized people as legitimate empirical data.
Right. Historically, academia and corporate auditing have often dismissed the stories of minorities as subjective or biased, while treating the data produced by the white majority as objective.
Counter-storytelling subverts this entirely. It argues that to understand a system of oppression, you must center the voices of the oppressed.
It actively challenges the dominant majoritarian narrative of meritocracy, the PR story that institutions use to shield themselves from critique.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment, because this is the exact pushback you would get from a corporate defense lawyer or a defensive HR director.
Oh, guaranteed.
They might look at a study heavily reliant on qualitative interviews and argue, well, these are just subjective feelings. This is anecdotal evidence.
Right. They'd say someone feels they were passed over for a promotion, they are upset, so they blame race.
Exactly. So how does this qualitative methodology actually prove that the issue is systemic and structural, rather than just isolated interpersonal conflicts?
It is the most common defense mechanism institutions use to dismiss qualitative findings. But your thesis anticipates this critique flawlessly, answering it through a rigorous application of triangulation, citing Creswell, 2021.
Let's explain triangulation for the listener, because it is the absolute linchpin of proving systemic issues.
Consider how a GPS system pinpoints your location. It doesn't rely on a single satellite signal.
Right, it uses multiple signals intersecting from different angles to determine an undeniable coordinate.
Methodological triangulation works the exact same way. You did not rely solely on one executive complaining about their boss.
No, you took the findings from the anonymous interviews, where executives are speaking freely behind closed doors, protected by anonymity.
Then you cross-reference those private admissions with the public, high-profile podcast interviews where executives are speaking on the record to an audience.
And then you cross-reference both of those data sets with the dynamic communal discussions from the live focus groups.
And what you found was that the signals all intersected at the exact same coordinates.
When the exact same themes of gatekeeping, exclusion, opaque pay structures, and the space invader syndrome emerge across anonymous private interviews, public broadcasts, and group settings.
And when those themes align perfectly with the 150-year historical context of the color bar we discussed earlier, it completely ceases to be anecdotal.
The overlap creates empirical proof of institutional design. As Blackster, Hughes, and Tite, 2006, note in your methodology, qualitative methods are absolutely essential for understanding how race intersects with industry practices.
The quantitative numbers tell you the building is broken. The qualitative narrative provides the architectural blueprints showing exactly how it was built to break.
So, with the methodology fiercely validated, let's look at the macro-level findings before we zoom into the deeply personal, micro-level lived experiences.
Right, it's at chapter 4.
This brings us to a massive structural observation you make regarding the data disconnect and what you term the excellence tax.
You identify a glaring, frankly deeply uncomfortable contradiction at the heart of the business, which you dub the London paradox.
The London paradox is a brilliant synthesis of geography, culture, and capital.
Oh, so...
Well, the UK music industry is overwhelmingly hubbed in London. It relies heavily on the cultural output of that city.
Yeah.
And as the British phonographic industry data BPI 2024 highlights, the industry profits massively, almost disproportionately, from Black cultural production.
Genres like grime, UK rap, Afro swing, R&B, and Afrobeats are not fringe movements. They are massive, central commercial drivers of the global streaming economy.
They are the cultural engine of the UK.
Exactly. Yet the paradox lies in the physical spaces of power. If you walk out of the recording studios and into the boardrooms and executive suites of the major labels, the publishers, and the digital streaming platforms,
The demographics do not reflect the vibrant diversity of London.
not even close.
More pointedly, they do not reflect the demographics of the creators whose music is generating their revenue.
The juxtaposition is stark. They are commodifying and selling the culture globally, but the people who originate from that culture are systematically locked out of the rooms where the financial distributions are decided.
Where the company strategy is set and where the real wealth is retained, it is cultural extraction without executive representation.
And this structural inequity breeds a deeply insidious psychological environment for the few minority ethnic executives who do make it inside.
Which leads directly to the concept of the excellence tax, drawn from the Kobe Research Institute 2024.
This concept of the excellence tax is one of the most infuriating, clarifying ideas in the entire thesis. It gives a name to an exhaustion that so many people feel but struggle to quantify. What exactly is this tax?
It is the hidden structural cost of navigating a space not built for you.
Right.
According to the Kobe research, which encompasses professionals across multiple corporate markets, a staggering 86% of Black professionals feel compelled to work significantly harder than their white peers just to be perceived as baseline competent.
Let's really pause on that word. Not exceptional, not brilliant, competent.
Yeah.
86% feel they have to exert a massive surplus of energy just to reach the neutral starting line of respect that is automatically afforded to the somatic norm.
Furthermore, 87% report actively suppressing aspects of their cultural expression, altering their natural hair, policing their tone of voice, softening their cadence, sometimes even anglicizing their names.
Just to navigate these professional environments safely and avoid triggering the biases of their white colleagues.
It makes me think of a physical analogy.
Okay.
Imagine being invited to play in a high-stakes, highly competitive Premier League football match.
Okay.
But because of your race, you are the only player on the pitch forced to wear a 20-kilo weighted vest.
Wow.
You still have to run the same distance, pass the same ball, and score the same goals. And when inevitably the sheer exhaustion sets in and you don't score as many goals as the unburdened players, the team managers point at you and say, well, you just don't have the talent.
Or your work ethic is lacking. Or you aren't quite the right cultural fit for this level of play.
Exactly. They judge your performance entirely devoid of the context of the weights they forced you to wear.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the cruelty of a false meritocracy. The corporate structure measures the output, but willfully ignores the unequal friction of the journey.
And the psychological burden of constantly wearing that weighted vest is immense. You synthesize this brilliantly with the psychological concept of stereotype threat, citing Quesad and Bryant, 2016.
Stereotype threat is the invisible hum of anxiety in the background of every decision.
It is the constant, exhausting fear of confirming negative stereotypes about your demographic group.
If a white A&R executive signs an artist who totally flops, it is viewed as an individual failure. It's just a bad day at the office, a missed guess.
But if a Black executive makes the exact same poor signing, stereotype threat means they carry the agonizing fear that their individual failure will be weaponized as proof that all Black executives lack commercial judgment.
You become a reluctant ambassador for your entire race. You aren't just managing a P&L sheet. You are managing the racial anxieties and stereotypes of your entire corporate structure simultaneously.
And this requires a level of hypervigilance that inevitably leads to burnout.
Oh, without a doubt.
Now, what makes this even more complex is how institutions respond when called out on this.
Mm.
If we connect this macro data to the wider societal shifts, particularly the post-2020 era, following the global protests over the murder of George Floyd.
Right. The music industry, perhaps more than any other sector, made massive, highly public declarations about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
We saw Blackout Tuesday, black squares on Instagram, millions of pounds pledged to task forces.
It felt like a watershed moment. The rhetoric was everywhere.
But the data in your thesis asks a deeply critical empirical question. Has diversity merely become a sophisticated PR shield?
Because the UK Music 2024 Diversity Report, the actual numbers, shows a decline in minority ethnic representation in certain key areas post-COVID.
So despite the black squares in the press releases, the actual material conditions for executives worsened or stagnated.
There is a vast, unbridgeable gap between corporate commitment and structural action.
You lean on Hall, 2018, here to explain this through the logic of liberal multiculturalism.
What does that mean in practice?
This is an ideology that enthusiastically celebrates cultural difference as a marketable commodity. The music, the fashion, the slang, while leaving the organization's white heart, its core concentration of power and capital, completely unchallenged and unchanged.
It is an illusion of progress. They want the optics of diversity, they want the cultural cachet, but they fiercely resist any actual transfer of executive power.
And when minority ethnic executives attempt to point out this discrepancy, they run into what Andrews, 2023, defines as the psychosis of whiteness.
That's a powerful term.
It's a deeply entrenched societal defense mechanism. It allows institutions and individuals to loudly proclaim their commitment to anti-racism and diversity, while simultaneously reacting with aggressive denial, defensiveness, or hostility when confronted with the tangible, undeniable realities of structural racism operating within their own walls.
It's a collective delusion. And this macro-level analysis, the excellence tax, stereotype threat, the illusion of liberal multiculturalism, this provides the weather system. It tells us what the climate is like.
But now we must look at what it's actually like to stand outside in that rain every single day.
This brings us to the beating heart of your thesis, Dr. Stevens. Chapter 5, the lived experience, the intersectionality and the microaggressions.
This section of the thesis is where the theoretical frameworks meet the raw, undeniable reality of human experience. You take all of this sociology and ground it in the testimony of the executives themselves.
And you begin this section with a vital analytical framework that is necessary to understand the varying degrees of marginalization, intersectionality.
Coined by the brilliant legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989, it is vital because we cannot look at race in a vacuum. It doesn't operate in a vacuum.
No, it does not. Intersectionality posits that overlapping systems of discrimination, such as race, gender, class, and sexuality, do not just exist side by side.
They compound and intersect to create entirely unique modes of disadvantage.
You cannot understand the experience of a black female executive by just adding the experience of racism to the experience of sexism.
The combination creates a unique alloy of discrimination.
And your findings regarding minority ethnic women in the UK music industry are stark. They don't just hit the traditional glass ceiling that white women face, they hit what your thesis describes as a concrete ceiling.
A powerful metaphor. A glass ceiling implies you can at least see the top floor, even if you are blocked from reaching it.
Right.
Concrete ceiling implies you are completely sealed off in the dark. You cannot see the roles above you, and those above you certainly cannot see you.
Minority ethnic women are dealing with the compounded burden of systemic racism and a very specific racialized misogyny, often referred to as misogynoir, a term you highlight via Blackwell 2023.
I was deeply struck by the testimony of participant G7, a black female executive.
Oh, her quotes were incredible.
You quote her explicitly noting that her professional challenges stemmed less from just being a woman in a male-dominated industry, but more the black woman part of things.
She pointed to constant draining judgments based on her hair, her overall look, and her accent.
She is describing a hyper-scrutiny that white female executives or even black male executives might not face in the exact same configuration.
Her professional competence is constantly being weighed against a racialized aesthetic standard that she can never and should never have to meet.
And when you look at the data concerning minority ethnic men, The intersectional lens reveals a different but equally exhausting survival mechanism.
The thesis highlights the pervasive, highly damaging trope of the angry black man.
This was heavily evident in the Access All Areas focus group data, particularly insights from Ricky Blue.
Blue, as the president of Since 93, a major joint venture with Sony Music UK, is a highly successful executive.
Yet he described a long-standing, ingrained pattern where black men in corporate spaces feel compelled to shrink ourselves down a little bit to make sure we could go through to see another day.
That phrasing is heartbreaking. Shrink ourselves down.
He talked about actively avoiding certain necessary standard business conversations, like negotiating budgets or challenging a strategic decision, because of the intense risk of being perceived as aggressive or threatening.
It is strategic self-censorship as a survival tactic. They are literally making their personalities, their ambitions, and their voices smaller to accommodate the fragility of the dominant corporate culture.
If a white executive raises his voice in a meeting, it is often coded as passion or leadership.
But if a black male executive does the exact same thing, it triggers the angry black man stereotype and is coded as insubordination or hostility.
Which ties perfectly back to Puwar's space invader concept. To exist in that space, you must neutralize yourself. You must make yourself as unthreatening to the somatic norm as possible.
Now, what's fascinating about your historical trace here, Dr. Stevens, is how you track the evolution of this racism within the industry. You make it clear that it hasn't vanished. It has mutated.
You document the transition from overt, undeniable racism to covert, insidious microaggressions. Though, crucially, the thesis notes that the overt has not been entirely eradicated.
There is a staggering, almost unbelievable story you recount from Keith Harris, shared on the Did Ya Know podcast in 2021.
Yes, this is the moment that made me stop reading and just stare at the wall.
Harris, a legendary figure in the industry, challenged a highly successful white A&R executive.
The white executive was boasting, and Harris simply asked him to consider what black music had done for him and his immense wealth, rather than just focusing on what he, the white executive, believed he had graciously done for black music.
It was a straightforward critique of cultural extraction and white privilege.
And the response was not a debate. The white executive became so incensed, so entirely consumed by white fragility and defensive rage, that he literally offered to take Harris outside and fight him.
A senior executive in a professional setting offering to fistfight a colleague over a philosophical critique of privilege.
It perfectly, violently illustrates the intense defensiveness that Andrews, 2023, described with the psychosis of whiteness.
When the illusion of meritocracy is punctured, the reaction is aggressive denial.
But as your thesis points out, while those explosive moments still occur, the day-to-day reality for most executives is a landscape saturated with microaggressions.
The constant subtle stings, invasive questions about hair, coded language about someone not being a culture fit.
Assumptions that a black executive must work in urban promotions rather than global strategy.
And you identify a major systemic manifestation of these biases, pigeonholing.
Your data reveals that minority ethnic executives are overwhelmingly concentrated, almost quarantined, within black music departments, rap, grime, R&B.
And while they excel in those departments and drive massive revenue, they are rarely, if ever, given the reins to mainstream, pop, or cross-genre frontline roles.
They are deemed specialists in their own race, but not generalists capable of running the whole company.
Consider the practical economic impact of that pigeonholing. By restricting their progression to a single, albeit lucrative, department, the industry has essentially created an artificial scarcity for minority ethnic talent.
Participant E5 describes this brilliantly, noting that it nurtures an unhealthy competitive streak amongst black execs.
Because the institution has decided there are only 2 or 3 chairs available for minority ethnic executives at the top table.
So highly talented individuals are forced to fight each other tooth and nail over a tiny slice of the pie, rather than competing with their white peers for the whole bakery.
It pits them against each other, distracting from the fact that the broader hierarchy remains entirely unequal.
It is a devastatingly effective institutional trap. It limits upward mobility while simultaneously fracturing solidarity among marginalized executives.
Now, if you are listening to this and you haven't worked in a toxic corporate environment, you might be thinking to yourself, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
These are massive multinational corporations. We're talking about global brands with billions in revenue. Surely they have massive human resources departments specifically designed to stop this kind of bullying, bias, and unfair treatment.
Well, that highly logical assumption leads us to one of the most shocking, damning findings in your entire thesis, Dr. Stevens, the absolute structural failure of HR.
The qualitative data you gathered reveals a profound, deep-seated, and almost universal distrust of human resources among the minority ethnic executives interviewed.
The perception is crystal clear, and it is articulated perfectly by participant R18, who stated bluntly, HR are there to protect the business, not the people.
That is a staggering indictment of the very system designed for employee welfare.
But it makes structural sense when you consider HR as a risk management tool for the corporation.
Right. When minority ethnic executives attempt to utilize HR to report discrimination, they frequently encounter what your participants describe as racial gaslighting.
Let's explain racial gaslighting in this context.
Participant J10 provided a harrowing example. An executive takes a legitimate, documented concern about racial bias or unfair treatment to HR.
Instead of investigating the systemic issue, HR and management invert the narrative.
They minimize the concern, question the executive's perception of reality, or worse, reinterpret the executive's complaint as proof that the executive is aggressive, demanding, or not a team player.
So the very mechanism designed to protect employees is weaponized against them.
The act of speaking up about the problem gets you labeled as the problem. The institution protects its somatic norm by pathologizing the person who points out the bias.
Exactly. And the result of this weaponization is what you term the calculated silence.
This is a heartbreaking survival strategy.
Executives perform immense emotional labor, swallowing insults, ignoring bypass promotions, and enduring microaggressions in silence.
They calculate that the risk of retaliation, of being labeled a troublemaker and having their career derailed by HR, is far greater than the slim chance of achieving justice.
And this lack of protection, this calculated silence, bleeds directly into the material reality of their lives, how they are paid. Let's talk about remuneration and the culture of secrecy.
Your thesis uncovers a pervasive culture of secretive wages and structural opacity regarding compensation. Pay scales, discretionary bonuses, and share options are often nebulous and hidden from view.
Because there is no mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting, minority ethnic executives struggle to benchmark their compensation against their white peers.
Bias thrives in the dark. If you do not know what the white executive in the office next to you is making for doing the exact same job, you cannot prove you're being underpaid.
The opacity is the point. And this lack of transparency forces minority ethnic executives to be hyper-proactive, adding another layer of uncompensated labor.
Participant N14, a C-suite executive, stated it plainly. If you don't ask the questions about something, you won't get it. Companies will just simply not reward you.
But wait, think about the trap we just discussed. If you boldly ask for the raise, if you aggressively negotiate for your worth, you risk triggering the angry black man trope.
Or for black women, you risk the compounded intersectional burden of being labeled demanding, which invites the HR gaslighting we just outlined.
That is the exact suffocating paradox your thesis illuminates. You are penalized financially if you don't ask, and you are penalized culturally and professionally if you do.
The psychological toll of constantly having to justify your worth, of constantly fighting for basic perks or salary bumps that are freely and quietly handed to white colleagues, is immense.
It brings us right back to the sheer exhaustion of the excellence tax.
And even when they do break through that concrete ceiling, even when they successfully navigate the gaslighting and secure the promotion to the senior level, your research identifies another insidious trap waiting for them: the glass cliff.
The glass cliff is a phenomenon first identified by Ryan and Haslam in 2005. And your application of it to the music industry is incredibly revealing.
It describes a situation where women and minority ethnic individuals are disproportionately appointed to leadership positions during times of severe organizational crisis.
Or they are promoted without the necessary institutional support, budget, or authority.
They are essentially set up to fail.
Precisely. Participant A1 provided a textbook example. They recounted a senior business contact warning them about a high-level deal they were offered, stating, "She's always maintained to this day that they did that deal to set me up to fail."
Why would a company do that? Why promote someone just to watch them crash?
Because it serves multiple institutional purposes. Imagine a label facing a massive PR crisis over a lack of diversity.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They promote a minority ethnic executive to a highly visible role to quell the public outrage, a symbolic diversity hire. But they don't give that executive the budget, the team, or the actual structural authority to enact meaningful change.
So when that executive inevitably fails to turn the crisis around due to lack of support, The failure is highly visible.
And then the institution weaponizes that failure to reinforce the somatic norm. They can turn around to the board and say, well, look, we tried diverse leadership, we gave them a shot, and it didn't work. We need to return to safe, traditional hands.
Meaning white male hands. It is incredibly cynical. It uses the failure of the marginalized individual to justify the continuation of the structural bias.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy orchestrated by the dominant group. Now, the music industry's favorite low-cost solution to all of this, their go-to PR response, is usually to launch a mentoring program.
Oh, of course. But Dr. Stevens, you make a very sharp, crucial distinction in your findings between mentorship and sponsorship.
Yes, I love this distinction. Let's break down why mentorship is insufficient to fix the glass ceiling.
The industry loves offering formal mentoring. It sounds great on a press release.
Mentoring involves an older executive giving advice, sharing experiences, reviewing a CV, or offering a sympathetic ear.
And while informal peer mentorship is a vital survival mechanism among minority ethnic executives, your data shows that what they actually lack and what actually moves the dial on careers is sponsorship.
Sponsorship is an entirely different verb.
It really is. Sponsorship involves a powerful individual, usually someone who fits the somatic norm and holds significant institutional capital, actively using their political capital to advocate for someone else.
A sponsor doesn't just give advice. They open doors, they fight for your promotion behind closed doors, and they physically pull you up into senior roles.
Let me put it in an analogy. It is the difference between someone giving you a map to a destination and wishing you luck, which is mentorship, and someone actually letting you drive their sports car, handing you the keys, and paying for the petrol, which is sponsorship.
Mentors talk to you. Sponsors talk about you in the closed boardrooms where the real decisions are made.
And without sponsors willing to spend their capital, the glass ceiling remains intact.
Which is why relying on individual resilience or individual mentoring will never dismantle a structural barrier.
Okay. We have journeyed through the entirety of the diagnostic process. We laid bare the historical roots from the 1870s and the color bar.
We examined the damning macro data of the London paradox.
We have heard the harrowing lived realities of gaslighting, secretive pay, and the glass cliff. So the ultimate question your thesis poses is, what do we actually do about it?
This brings us to the final section, Chapter 6, the main takeaways and the blueprint for change.
The conclusion of your thesis is a masterclass in actionable structural critique. It pulls no punches.
To quickly synthesize the main takeaways before we get to the solutions, the research proves conclusively that the ethnic pay gap is persistent and pervasive.
Systemic and institutional racism is deeply embedded in the UK music industry's DNA, acting as an invisible architecture.
Intersectionality multiplies these burdens, creating a concrete ceiling for Black women. The mental health toll, the racial trauma, the stereotype threat, and the hypervigilance is severe and largely unaddressed.
And unsurprisingly, there is intense justified skepticism regarding current DEI initiatives, which executives view as performative optics designed to protect the brand rather than reform the system.
Which leads to the most important philosophical conclusion of your work. Individual resilience is no longer a viable solution.
Exactly. For decades, the message has been, keep your head down, work twice as hard, and you will overcome it.
But your thesis proves that relying on individual resilience places the entire burden of fixing racism onto the victims of it.
Furthermore, it shatters the myth of meritocracy. If the system is structurally biased, merit alone cannot overcome it. You cannot outwork a rigged algorithm. Structural intervention is the only cure.
And you don't just call for intervention, you provide the architectural plans for it. Let's break down Dr. Stevens' primary recommendations. This is the actionable blueprint. Recommendation number 1, mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting.
This is the foundational step. The thesis demands that the UK government must legislate mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting, replicating the exact mechanisms of the existing gender pay gap reporting.
Why is making it law so critical?
Because voluntary transparency has failed for 150 years. If you force companies to publish the data, you create an undeniable baseline for accountability.
You destroy the opacity that allows secretive wages and racial gaslighting to flourish. Once the numbers are public, shareholders, artists, and the public can demand change. The X-ray finally becomes visible.
Recommendation number 2, affirmative or positive action. Now, this is where you push past passive solutions.
This is a robust application of the critical race theory principles you established earlier. You cite Delgado, Stefanchik, and Harris 2017 regarding the permanence of racism.
The idea that race-neutral laws, like simply saying we don't discriminate, will never fix historically entrenched inequality.
The thesis advocates aggressively utilizing the provisions within the Equality Act 2010 to implement targeted, legally sound, positive action.
What does positive action look like in a boardroom?
It means moving beyond just posting a job ad online and hoping for diverse applicants. It means targeted recruitment drives. It means specific, funded succession planning to ensure minority ethnic talent is prepared for the C-suite.
And yes, it means setting hard, quantifiable targets for representation at the executive level. Participant E5 explicitly called for this in your data, stating, we need 15% Black execs.
It is about actively dismantling the hierarchy rather than passively hoping it dissolves on its own.
Okay, recommendation number 3. And when I read this, I thought it was the most radical, but also the most logically inevitable conclusion based on what you found regarding HR unionization for executives.
It is arguably the most vital structural recommendation in the entire thesis. We think of unions for warehouse workers or musicians, but executives operate in a bizarre, precarious void without any collective representation.
Because internal HR departments exist fundamentally to protect the business from liability, minority ethnic executives are left completely isolated against well-resourced, deeply entrenched corporate machineries.
They are fighting institutional battles with a wooden sword.
Exactly. Establishing an independent external trade union specifically for music executives would radically alter the power dynamic.
It would provide impartial advice, legal protection, and most importantly, collective bargaining power. It would protect individuals from the institutional gaslighting and secretive pay structures that currently isolate them.
As participant I-9 noted, a union would relieve individuals of the exhausting extra work of fighting these systemic battles entirely alone. It outsources the resistance.
Finally, recommendation 4, transparency and accountability.
This acts as the structural glue for the other recommendations. It encompasses standardizing pay bands across the industry so everyone knows exactly what a role is worth.
It demands overhauling the HR function to include independent external reporting mechanisms for grievances so executives don't have to report racism to the very company perpetuating it.
And crucially, it demands funding for culturally competent mental health support to address the specific, documented racial trauma that the industry inflicts on its marginalized workforce.
Dr. Stevens, speaking directly to you once again as we bring this deep dive to a close. This thesis is not just an academic critique that will sit on a dusty shelf in a university library.
This is an actionable, rigorous, profoundly deeply researched blueprint to dismantle a 150-year-old hierarchy.
The weight of the work you have done here is monumental. You haven't just diagnosed the murky, invisible problem. You have provided the precise architectural plans to tear down the walls and rebuild the system.
It is, without hyperbole, a paradigm-shifting piece of research. By employing counter-storytelling, by triangulating 150 years of historical context with the harrowing lived realities of today's executives, and by applying incredibly robust theoretical frameworks, you have taken the invisible mechanics of the glass ceiling and made them undeniably, empirically visible.
You have given the industry the X-ray it has been trying to hide.
And as we wrap up this celebration of your PhD, we want to leave you, Dr. Stevens, and all of our listeners with one final lingering thought to mull over. We've spent this entire time inside the corporate machine, but let's step outside the boardroom for a second and look at the wider cultural landscape.
If the global music industry continues to profit immensely from Black cultural expression, and often, quite frankly, from the commodification of Black pain and trauma in the art itself, what is our ethical responsibility as consumers?
Right. It forces a mirror onto the audience. If the executives who are shaping the very music we stream on our phones, the music we buy, the music we dance to in clubs, if the people curating that culture are actively silenced by non-disclosure agreements, crushed by hidden pay gaps, and exhausted by systemic racism, can we truly ethically enjoy the art if the architects behind it are systematically locked out of the boardroom?
It forces us to look back at that corporate blueprint. We might love the music that comes out of the building, but we have to ask ourselves whose careers were sacrificed in the foundation.
It is a profound, unsettling question that demands our attention every time we press play. Once again, a massive, massive congratulations on passing your PhD, Dr. Hakeem Stevens. Your work is vital. And for everyone listening, keep questioning the architecture around you.